everyone, and welcome back to a special edition of Human Factor Security. It is the Tinfoil Hack Club, the Lockdown Diaries, with our good friend Philip Ingram, MBE.
Hi, Jenny. I've got
Who
my
is
hat
we-
on.
Who's wearing his tinfoil hat, which is actually his green beret with tinfoil, which is very, very cool. And our other good friend, Ian Thornton. Hi, Ian.
Hey, everyone.
Also wearing beret with tinfoil.
Indeed.
And I've got a bear on mine, and mine's not a beret. I want one, but I've got to aim one.
well, I think we've proven today that the silver bow doesn't keep the Russians and Chinese out, but we can talk about that later.
So obviously, when I've got very technical friends on board, there's always very technical things like Jenny getting the Zoom invite wrong and stuff. But we had to bring you another Lockdown Diaries Tinfoil Hack Club before the UK hope comes out of our third big lockdown, I guess we'd say. So we started Tinfoil Hack Club outside of lockdown, became the Lockdown Diaries Tinfoil Hack Club, and it is my pleasure to welcome you both back. Last time we spoke, President Trump was in power. We didn't know about solar winds. And I thought, I don't know about you, I thought we might have a quiet 2021. It's not proven to be, is it?
No, and actually far from it. Everything that could explode seemed to explode. From the IT supply chain to a bit of a wee blockage over in a particularly interesting part of the world, right, Phil?
Well, yeah, very interesting. I'm feeling a bit nervous now that you said that everything that could explode has exploded, because I think there's an awful lot more.
Fair enough.
And we're in real danger. But no, wasn't that Suez blockage? Note I got the pronunciation right. It wasn't sewerage blockage. The Suez blockage. That's been a great signpost to every terrorist organization around the world that wants to hijack or buy a ship and just scuttle it there. Look at what they can do. Hey, fantastic.
Historically, obviously, Suez Canal, massive significance. Really don't want the Tory government talking too much about it, because you kind of think that they don't have the best history.
The first time they had a problem at the Suez Canal was because the Egyptians stopped traffic, right, Phil? Now the Egyptians were actually the ones getting the traffic going again. So I'm going to call it even.
Well, yeah, the Egyptians originally nationalized it, and there was the scare about it. That's when the great British government sort of sent the paratroopers in, and you can imagine them on the aircraft. They're flying in, the side doors open and the back doors open, and they go red on, and everyone's getting ready, and then it's green on, go 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 go, and then suddenly the phone rings in the back of the aircraft, and it's London saying, we said go, and no, stop it. Red on again. Hey, you lot, come back. Didn't quite work.
But so I've seen these ships off the coast of the UK, these giant, these mega ships. And so I watched this with kind of some amusement, because there's the guy that seemed to be drawn the rude picture with his trajectory. Did you see? I sent you that, and I'll pop that up. But in anticipation of the show, I just was watching a couple of reports, and I saw this one, and I wondered if Phil had seen it, and if not, what Phil would think. So basically, the Russian ambassador in Cairo offered to help in whatever way was necessary and possible, and added that Egypt had not reached out to Russia so far. He also emphasised that should the problem persist, the northern route was a great alternative, and provided 15 days quicker than using the Suez Canal for many vessels. He also added that this provided a great push for them to continue developments in the Arctic.
Yeah, well, that was fantastic in so many different ways. I hadn't seen the report, but the Russians have always been trying to regain their influence back into Egypt again, and through the Suez Canal, and maintain their or develop their regional influence. They've now got quite a strong regional influence with what they've been doing in Syria and backing Bashar al-Assad. However, there's been a big push in Russia and Moscow and some big exercises in the opening of the northern route around, and they'd love that to happen. However, the sad thing about that is it's signposting global warming, and Ian's got global warming behind him, I see.
Well, I mean, when I saw that, I just thought, oh God, of course. We are then in tinfoil hat territory, aren't we? Because is this what it seems? And it made me straight away think, we're all sort of laughing and going, because the first thing I said was, where's that ship? Who owns that ship? And it's a Japanese company, I think. And obviously I'll find out and put a screenshot on. But actually, the Ever Given is operated by the Taiwan-based shipping company Evergreen Group.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, comrade. And, especially when perhaps the crisis can be manufactured. And in this particular case, the crisis was 400 million a day. So that's a pretty compelling thing. I mean, I was one of the first few people to recommend a full-scale Harpoon missile strike, thus reducing it to slag and getting global shipping going in the next 24 hours. My proposal, I put forward, it didn't go anywhere.
Didn't go anywhere.
But when
I'm glad. I'll tell you why.
But when you think about it, to be fair, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than 400 million a day as an option, and everything there would be insured, anyways. So
yeah, but the Suez Canal's not that deep, and it would have probably cost an awful lot more and taken a lot longer to clear all the garbage.
But the pieces would be smaller. They would be really small.
But to talk...
was this a small thermonuclear missile we're talking about?
Oh, you and your thermonuclear devices, Ian.
It's for those who are listening who haven't listened to it or don't follow it, if you're on Twitter, follow the RAF Luton side.
Yes.
They talk about semi-nuclear missiles and various other capabilities out there, and you need to follow them to understand the utility of semi-nuclear missiles that could be used. And I think, Ian, your idea was one of those semi-nuclear missiles.
Nah, I mean, fuel air explosive. There's a lot of options out there, but I felt that it could have been explored, because if there's one thing I love, it's a spectacular end to a crisis. Because now that it's been unstuck, it's like, it's unstuck, and global shipping continues, and those sea containers full of fidget spinners will get to their destination and flip-flops.
I mean, I just felt like it could have been a show of strength. I mean, it just shows, because I'd forgotten about it. It seems sort of in some ways it's very traditional. It would be a very traditional move to do something like that. It reminds everybody that there's actual physical goods need to be moved around the world. And of course, if you're moving physical goods, you might be moving, there might be military ships and that type of thing. It was a very clever thing. Even if the Russians didn't orchestrate that particular crisis, it was clever to comment on it in that way, I thought. And I would just remind everyone, I would just want to recommend a book called Prisoners of Geography, which I'll flash up on here because the author's name just escapes my old brain just for a second.
Tim Marshall.
But there we go, Tim Marshall, that's right. Tim Marshall, and he talks about exactly this, and he talks about the North Passage opening up because of global warming, and which nations have icebreaker ships. And the nation with the most icebreaker ships by miles and miles is Russia. Actually, Russia has 46 ships with 11 under construction, including the giant Artika, which will be the biggest in the world and carrying 2 thermonuclear reactors. It plans 11 more under construction. Canada has 7 with 2 under construction and 5 planned. Finland 10, Sweden 7, USA 5, China 3 with 1, a nuclear 1 under construction, and the UK has the Sir David Attenborough with 1 planned. The Sir David Attenborough is also known as Boaty McBoatface. But this is why, because they want that Northern Passage open, don't they?
But it's also, there's a strategic bit in there, in that the Russian ports tend to be iced up and frozen, and they're military ports, the big military ports, iced up and frozen during the winter. So the only way that they can ensure to get military capability out into the North Atlantic, or out through the Black Sea, and I think out into the Pacific, I may be wrong on the port there, is with icebreakers to get in and out. Whereas the US, the great US of A, the UK, other NATO nations and other contributing nations don't have that problem. The Russians have tried to get around it by having a Mediterranean-based port in Syria, hence why Syria is at the center of their geopolitical position and the support for Assad, or one of the reasons for it, because it's their only completely open port. I may be slightly wrong here, so I'm sure people will jump in and correct it in the comments underneath. But it's their only completely free port the whole way through the year, and they don't have an awful lot of capability in it. So they need that to open it up. And the Tim Marshall book is brilliant at bringing all these little bits and pieces together. We will see out of it, and with the opening up of the northern routes, we are going to see a greater geopolitical race for control of the Arctic. That's certain. Absolutely
and the
certain.
resources underneath the Arctic, because
that's
without
why.
global warming,
it's wide open, and Canada is uniquely positioned to give in to any external power that decides to flex. And this has already been demonstrated by the fact that the Russians are forced projecting into the Arctic with bases and air defense missile systems as well. So unfortunately, while the focus has always been on the Middle East geography and the instability in Middle East, the crisis points that I see unfolding within the short term of the next 2 to 5 years is really the South China Sea and the Northwest Passage. And one of the problems, I think that it's fair to say with the Northwest Passage in particular, is the environmental sensitivity of that particular area. And the fact that it is not particularly well patrolled or observed. So for instance, if you had a whole bunch of radioactive material and you needed a place to dump it, some isolated part of the shores of Canada is the ideal spot. It'd take us years to find it.
Yeah.
There's interestingly, there's been a lot of in the past week, and we're sort of just before Easter as we're recording this. The past week, there's been a lot of military activity where sniffing aircraft from the west have been up, having a little look at northern Russia and some of the exercises that are going on there, because President Putin isn't holding back on the development of capabilities. He developed something where he gets a onesies or twosies of it and then says, we've got this massive capability, and never takes it to production because he can't afford to do that. But he's throwing it out there. And I agree with you, the North West Passage and South China Seas. South China Seas is probably the single biggest flashpoint in the coming period of time, which is why I think the UK government has made the decision that the first operational deployment of HMS Queen Elizabeth, God rest her soul, is going to be down into the South Pacific or the South China Seas region, which is fascinating.
Given all this activity from potential adversaries on the global stage, it's a good job that we're not cutting back on our military capabilities. For example, so this is a story that is about they are going to invest more in the technical and cyber side of our military, reducing our army to its small size in 200 years. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has pointed out there is no point boasting about numbers of regiments and tanks when our adversaries are devising new ways to defeat them. This is just the nature of weapons and tech, he says. The Prime Minister is cheering up vendors like the BAE Systems, who he spends a fortune with, although he said in his manifesto a year ago he would definitely not cut the armed forces. All semantics, Phil, I think. The target is, at the moment, is 82,000 army troops. We now are standing at 76,000, but by 2025, they expect to reduce that to 72,000. The Navy are retiring 2 frigates early, along with a further 24 by the 2030s. The tanks are being cut as well. We're scrapping 9 Chinooks with no replacement, 20 Puma helicopters that will be replaced, but we don't know what with. They're not announcing that yet. But the increase in tech is a good thing, even though we're only investing 1.5 billion in the space program. The MOD is calling this transformational change. It says that the threats are coming from Russia and China, and we will be helped by a new Ranger force, which will train foreign militaries and then go with them to the fight. Tobias Elwood, chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, has said The arrival of new threats does not necessarily mean the old ones have gone away, and this is a foolish move. Thoughts? Let's go to Phil first. Thoughts,
Well,
Phil?
yes, interesting. This is all from the new Defence in a Competitive Age command paper, which is supposed to be Defence's part of the Integrated Defence and Security Review that was announced a week beforehand. Now, the Integrated Defence and Security Review, overall government policy about how UK PLC is going to work in the world. It was a pretty good paper, actually, in giving sort of big hand, small map, broad brush stuff. And we expected the defense one then to go into an awful lot more detail about what it was going to provide. And it was equally very, very small map. We have to question the accuracy of bits of the map as well. And a very, very big hand. So it came out with lots of good cries as to what might sound good. And its overall headlines, if I was marking it as a staff college paper, as a solid start, a good B+. But then we get into the word however, and however after the start of an assessment is never a good one. The devil is in the detail. And the trouble is with this paper, there is no detail. The Ranger Regiment, you mentioned, part of a new Army Special Operations Brigade. I'm not surprised because the Chief of the General Staff at the minute is a guy called General Sir Mark Carleton-Smith, who commanded 22 Special Air Service Regiment in Iraq and Afghanistan between 2002 2005. But the heart of the new Special Operations Brigade, the new Ranger Regiment, comes from 4 infantry regiments that already exist. And if you're going to have a Special Operations Brigade, it needs to be able to go places, and that means strategically. Well, they've cut a lot of the lift, they've cut all the Hercules aircraft out. They're cutting a lot of the helicopters. So how are they going to get from A to B? It doesn't talk anything about how they're going to get more communications. They need to communicate from wherever they are in the world back to the UK and get highly classified communications in. There's nothing talking about bringing their intelligence together. It's a very lightweight paper that probably leaves more questions than it answers in capability terms. In a way, Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State for Defence, is right in 2 ways. One, size doesn't matter, and we'll keep that as a debate to defence, please. The second piece in there is actually you have to make sure that you only have the capabilities that you can afford. And for the first time, I think they've actually started to match the equipment capabilities with the money to get an affordability in there, and that is a good thing. However, there isn't a coherent plan in it. I'm a military planner by background, and to plan things, you need to understand what you need to do, why you need to do it, how long you need to do it, how often you need to repeat doing it, and how many of the things you need to do at the same time. And unless you've got all of that, you can't work out what your force structures is. You can't work out what you need to do it with. None of those questions have been answered in this, and that's a fundamental flaw.
And it now gives the UK a limited capability, I would say, in terms of even minor problems that need a sizable integrated combat battalion deployed and sustained in the field. When you look at those numbers and you divide them by 5, that's the number of combat troops roughly that you may have available. And that comes down to around 20,000. When you now divide it into 3 to sustain operations where you have to have 1 set training, 1 set coming back to the home country, and 1 set deployed, it does not give you a lot to work with in a toolbox. Obviously, war in Europe is a distant possibility over vaccines, but we can get to that issue maybe later. But I would say that I don't think it was far-reaching enough in understanding the current threat landscape. And unfortunately, the issue of reliance on technology has proven time and time again that it can be greatly disappointing. And I think that we are actually, it's a bit of a distraction, if you will, from a key problem that is, I think, permeating most Western and European military forces, and that is the issue of racism and sexism within the military structures. And I think this is a real distraction from getting folks mission ready and moving forward in terms of capability. And it demands a change in leadership. And you know, Phil and I were talking about this, that, you know, some of the procurement programs that I've seen in Canada and that have been disclosed in the UK should have criminal consequences for the mismanagement. And so I think and maybe this is why Phil would rate it a B and I would call it, you know, a C, is that it is a too broad ranging and doesn't actually solve the problems. Who's to say? I think it's fair to say, who's to say that, you know, we're going to need greater military capability in cyber. Perhaps what we need to do is look at greater justice and law enforcement capability in cyber to actually reduce the chance that there is an escalation of cyber activity that requires the intervention of military force. Okay. And then the rule of law. And when you think about, you know, some of the rhetoric that has come out about cyber war, that we're going to retaliate with potentially a nuclear option, well, that's ridiculous when we have the problems of attribution that we have today. So realistically, when you want to talk about, you know, things like ISTAR and targeting, you actually need that capability. You need the human int, you need the signals intelligence and stuff like that. And if all of those things are getting cut and you're left with a bunch of folks behind a keyboard trying to ping an enemy gateway, I think you're missing the whole point of what a modern military needs to be able to do and accomplish. So yeah, so I think that we're struggling. We need to take a look at what the commitments are that we made. I mean, it's not like Russia isn't being provocative in parts of the world. It's not like China, as we talked about, the South China Sea being a potential flashpoint. We need capability and we need deployable, what I would call deterrence. You're simply not going to get that with this new plan.
No, I mean, I think it's really interesting that both of you point to it being something of a distraction, and I felt like that really when I read the plan, because I thought what this does is it gives people, it gives them really a good comeback when we look at things like, for example, solar winds and the fact that that's being attributed. I think we're still saying it's Russia now. I think it's very clear that it was. Now that Trump's out and wouldn't admit who it was and wouldn't say who it was, which was, I mean, I was just on another show and I was talking about, I watched every single late night US commentary show when just in those last couple of months of President Trump's presidency. And I was up at 6, you know, and before 6, watching the news because I really expected something huge to happen, you know, where someone was going to be assassinated or someone, I mean, I thought he's not going to go quietly. And how is this going to play out? And then it seemed to sort of go quieter than I expected. And then when the solar winds, the extent of it started to be really known, those 18,000 organizations and all 5 branches of the US military and the CIA and the FBI. I was like, that's it. That's what it was. And he wouldn't admit it. So to me, when I look at this plan, this is the answer to that, isn't it? They can say, well, you know, the area of increased spending the most is cyber. But as you've both said, and as Tobias Elwood said, but that just doesn't give us the full picture.
Well, and it doesn't take into account history. There's a few things, and there's so much that you've both said there. But if we look at all the different capabilities that there are, there's lots of talk about kit and various other bits and pieces. If we look at the last 3 big conflicts that there have been, that the British Army have been involved in and lost most people in, Northern Ireland.
Yep. Was
that a technological enemy? No.
Nope.
It was an enemy amongst the people, an insurgency, people who lived amongst the population, who made their explosives from fertilizers from farms, who got weapons from different places. So that's there. Iraq, put aside the Iraq War, put the longer term stabilization piece. Who were the primary enemy that were there? Well, it was Muqtada's, al-Sadr's Mahdi army and AQI. Again, a low, unsophisticated military force that you're not going to defeat with technology. Let's get into Afghanistan. Oh, well, we've got the Taliban and we had Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. A low unsophisticated military capability that's kept the most sophisticated nations in the world tied up, and arguably in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's defeated both of them. And yet, instead of investing in the capabilities that you need to understand and deal with that in the successful way that, and I'm going to be controversial here, the military managed to force the situation in Northern Ireland to culminate and get to a political settlement. That hasn't happened in Iraq and hasn't happened in Afghanistan. We've been defeated and thrown out by unsophisticated people who don't use all this technology. And what are we doing about it? Oh, we're buying more technology.
The MOD says, they actually addressed it. They said transformational change, because they said that the primary threats we will face are coming from Russia and China. That's what they've said. And so that's how they've explained exactly that point.
I think, though, and I agree with Phil, but I will say this, is that we don't really understand what is coming at us over the horizon. Yeah. And we have, in Western democracies, limits on what the military can do internally in support of civilians. And we have rules about that. And clearly, if we militarize cyber, which is, something that has been talked about the military response, for instance, to solar winds. Okay, so if the worst we're going to do to China for committing genocide against some people is sanction a few people, how is it possible that we then get to a response to a cyber attack and go anything more than sanctioning a few people? Yeah. I mean, China's committing genocide, and we're concerned about, a cyber infiltration of the IT supply chain. We don't have a textbook for proportional response.
And this is a fascinating thing that has been missed in the command paper. They brought out their traditional warfare. There are three domains: land, maritime, and air. And this command paper brings in cyber and space. You can argue about space. That's fine, and put it in there. But let's look at it from a rules-based society, and that's what we're all about. Land, maritime, air are all covered in a rules-based society or rules-based world by the Geneva Protocols.
Correct. Yeah.
Space and the militarization of space, the military use of space, has been touched on in the 1968 or 1969 Outer Space Treaty. But at least there's a rules-based foundation that's there. Cyber, there's nothing. Right. There was an attempt with Talon 1 and Talon 2 protocols, where there's a negotiation amongst the NATO Cyber Center in Talon to bring and identify what rules that there could be. But not all NATO nations, and it's a NATO headquarters, not all NATO nations contributed to that. And all of the nations that did contribute scientists and cyber experts to it haven't signed up to the protocols that are voluntary that they brought in. So how are they going to get the rest of the world to do that? And it's the genie's out of the bottle, and the genie's in such a way that those big malign cyber players, Russia, China, their plausibly deniable outlets like North Korea, Iran, are all sitting there with this genie, and they haven't used their 5 wishes. And there's no way they're going to let that genie get put back into the bottle again until they can use their 5 wishes. And one of those wishes is going to be, at the end of each time, can I have another 5 wishes, please? So it'll go on forever and ever and ever.
I completely agree. And I mean, the other deplorable situation is the ICRC, International Red Cross, has attempted to put down some rules, but have gotten zero political support for it. The Americans have not signed on to the latest International Criminal Court rules. So we're completely fragmented in terms of rules. And my fear is that the only way we're going to get to an understanding of the power and danger of these weapons is, very similar, mirroring our experiences with chemical weapons. And until we see, a city's infrastructure be obliterated by a cyber attack, along with the supply chain that causes thousands of people to either starve or not be able to access fresh water, and the resulting disease from that, we're going to have to see something catastrophic before we get any sort of rule of law to govern this. And that is a huge concern. And this is where one of the things I think, Phil, that was missed was really around, let's build resilience and capacity in Britannia. And I thought that the military would be a great opportunity. And if they want to blur the lines over into the civilian area, there are many areas of enforcement opportunity of international maritime law that the British could embark upon and support these missions globally.
I think the next thing that I suppose I wanted to talk to you both about was, last time we spoke, it was in the last kind of crazy months of the Trump administration and of the kind of real frenzy that happened in the whole world, the kind of madness of the first kind of COVID lockdowns globally and everything else. Now we've got a new administration in the White House. Bobby, where are we left politically now that we've had this changing of the guard in Washington?
I Jenny, think we're in almost a more worrying time. And I'll say that because we've got Joe Biden, who's coming in, who's quite an elderly gentleman, and there are some questions over his health and therefore his capacity to make any real changes. But what we've had through Trump, and I've just finished reading Barack Obama's autobiography, which is an absolutely fantastic read. Mm-hmm. But I always thought that this polarization in US society had started with Trump and Trumpism coming through and all the rest of it. It hadn't. It had gone back to whenever Obama was first campaigning, and we got the Tea Party coming up and Sarah Palin being run as the vice president, and the polarization in the states that's there. And that just reflects the polarization that's been going on. But we've now had, 12 years of that polarization having different foci to be focused into the beam that was Trump for his period of time, and that Trump lens has gone, so it's scattering a little bit more. But I think Joe Biden is going to have real difficulty in trying to catch that scatter and control it in a way. And US politics is so polarized that they're going to be, for the foreseeable future, focused internally and not be in a position to worry about what's going on externally. Well, the Chinese are going to exploit that. The Russians with solar winds have already recognized that and are going to exploit it from the very beginning. And I therefore think that Trump has started the instability, but it started long before him. What we're going to see is, with Biden being fixed and being elderly and US politics being fixed, we're going to see a greater destabilization. And I can't see a way of any of the nations getting grip of that, especially as Europe's beating itself apart at the moment over the COVID vaccine and dealing with that. And that's going to cause huge problems, which is probably another podcast all by itself.
Well, Ian. I mean, I would say to Ian, I 100% agree with Phil. And the Trump was not the cause; he was the symptom. Surely. Yeah. Would you agree, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to Cheney and that era in the United States, where we had the beginnings of the right movement in the United States. I'm not as sort of pessimistic as Phil, and here's why. I feel like we're getting close to getting the right people in the place that will prevent America from becoming a failed state. I think the two needle indicators right now, from what I'm seeing in the media at least, is we're getting on the right path. But I think America has been damaged. It has suffered tremendously under the pandemic and the mishandling of the pandemic. And it's shown the fractures between the unitedness of the states, as they like to call themselves, and any sort of central government. And I think, to Phil's point, where that fracture has really been apparent is in the relationships that the state governments have to the federal government, and a lack of trust and a complete partisanization between red states and blue states. So America is down. I think it's not out for the count, but I do think that if nations are relying on America to engage externally, the house is on fire. very similar to the rhetoric that I saw come out of the UK over should we vaccinate everybody first and then hand excess vaccinations to the developing nations, or should we start, parceling it out based on risk, giving developing nations vaccination against their most vulnerable people. There's arguments on both sides, but when the cupboard is bare, when, you've signed $1.9 trillion in stimulus to your own country and to your own citizens, there's not a lot extra in the money vault, So I think there's a broad range of geopolitical things where America will be focused on its own problems, exacerbated by global climate change. It's not like the fires of California are going to stop, or the floods or the hurricane seasons are going to get less severe. So I think we're into a period where America, due to unforeseen circumstances, or maybe they are foreseen, is unable to perform at the level we used to expect it to.
I mean, what I hear when you say that, and when we hear this discussion, is that it's both at a granular level and at a geopolitical level. It just, America's got to pull itself out of this, and so whether it, like you say, the fires aren't going to stop, but perhaps Biden won't suggest that cleaning the leaves up like they do in Finland would prevent them in the first place. The hurricanes won't stop, but maybe Biden or Kamala Harris is not going to say that we should nuke a hurricane to stop that. So I like that, like the kind of really out there policies and statements have stopped. But I wonder, as does Phil, and I wouldn't say I agree, I'm sort of more on I'm trying to be optimistic desperately, whether Biden is the man for it, just because of his age and his fragility. You can see that he's fragile. I think he makes good, solid decisions. He seems to be a grown-up in charge, finally. We didn't seem to have that. It seemed to be quite kind of erratic, is a kind of way of putting it. But whether he's the man to pull America out of what surely must be one of its darkest times. I mean,
I think is fixed domestically. And I think that's probably why Solar Winds happened when it did, because we are seeing other nations flexing their power just to test and see what's going on.
We are, first of all, I want to say thanks so much to my guests today, Ian Thornton and Philip Ingram, who always provides us with a discussion that ends up taking in the wider sense of security. As just one last question, which we can answer very quickly, gentlemen, as we go into what is hopefully the end of this lockdown and the end of lockdowns as we've known them going forward. We are approaching Easter in the UK, and we are hoping that fairly soon we'll be out of the woods a little bit and can mingle again. You optimistic that this will be the last big lockdown, Phil?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think if people behave themselves, we'll not go into a big lockdown again. There might be small ones around the place, or restrictions on certain big gatherings. But that's up to people to still remember hands, face, space. Just because you've had a jab and I've had mine, that's because I'm an old individual. Hands, face, space, keep it going, and we won't be locked down again.
Well, hopefully. And Ian, what about you? You optimistic going forward? You're looking forward to getting out against it?
I'm glad we're an island. I think domestically, we're going to do quite well. We're going to recover. But I think international travel is going to be a far off wish. And, as we talked earlier, don't know yet if we're going to be able to gather in the large numbers. I think we need more vaccinations. So support the NHS and support vaccination. Get your jab.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, we could all, I mean, here's me with the Winchester behind me, and it was the last thing that we were allowed to do, but let's hope that at some point we're all in some pub somewhere. I want to say thanks again to Ian Thornton and Philip Ingram, MBE, for a brilliant Tinfoil Hat Club, and thanks to you, the listeners. Stay safe, keep indoors until we're allowed to go out, follow all the rules, and let's hope that soon there'll be a live Tinfoil Hat Club at some event somewhere. But for now, thanks very much, gentlemen.
Cheers, Jenny.